Greetings and salutations, 'tis I, Justin Hawkins. This is a show I particularly like. Hi, it's Russ Kane. This is Men's Radio Station. You're listening, of course, to The Daily Show, exclusive to Men's Radio Station. Nice to be back. I hope you're okay. Life is... They always say we live in interesting times. I'd like them to be a little less interesting and a little more stable. Speaking of stable, brings me to horses, which brings me to New Malden, which brings me to Neil Long. Yeah, I know. Nay, nay, and twice nay. Are you?
And all that. Good afternoon. Welcome to Men's Radio.
Are you channeling your inner Magnum PI? Is that what you're doing?
I absolutely am. Before we start, I have an announcement. We were going to have Shalia on today, and she's had to pull out because she's got a bad throat. So I did find a potential.
Call her Showbiz.
Another great guest, but they may call during the show. So if I suddenly take myself out,
it'll be the doctors to give you the results
and get a bit.
I warned you about
Did
going
you have to
into
repeat
weather.
that
I
on
warned
air?
you about going into Weatherspoons, but you wouldn't listen. Should we crack on with our first? I'm getting so many. Do you know, if you agree to be on a Men's Radio Station show and you're sent the instructions an hour before the show, don't start saying, "Oh, I didn't know it was video." Don't start doing that. It's really annoying. Just mentioning it when you've had weeks to prepare. Okay, should we bring on our first guest?
Absolutely.
Oh, look at that. There's producer Ken. Look, is he bringing you coffee or something? What's he bringing you?
Don't put that on the screen.
What was that rude?
Yes. If you see my stand-up routine, that would take on a whole new significance.
Oh, okay. Well, I haven't. I have yet the pleasure. My life will be complete. Before we bring on the first guest, I do want to say commiserations to one of my dearest friends in the world, Phil Dave, who you all know and love. Phil lost one of his dogs overnight, passed away.
Oh, dear.
He's really upset. I've had a chat with him. And I said to him, "Oh, the other dog," because they're two mini Dachshunds. And I said, "Oh, but the other one must be pining." He said, "No, hasn't even noticed."
Oh,
showbiz for you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's bring on Dr. Ben Cave. Dr.
Hello.
Cave, how are you?
Hello, Ben.
Hello, I'm very well indeed. How are you both?
Yeah, we're fine. Ben, can't ask me for a sound check 10 seconds before the show starts. Best will in the world. Ain't gonna happen. We're nice to see you. Is this the new sort of video call for doctors now? This is how we do diagnoses.
It's how we do everything.
Why? Why?
It's not before time. It's
what?
It's proper technology. I'm fed up with the politicians saying that we need to start seeing our doctors again. Sure, we need to be able to see doctors sometimes, but so much more could be done more efficiently with video interface calls.
How can you tell if I've got a swelling or a this or a that if I'm on the video?
Well, we have a video.
I didn't know we were going to get into this, but it's something I feel very strongly about, oddly enough.
We have a video chat, and then they say, "Come and see me." It depends on the nature of the problem. Some things you can do very well, some you can't.
Wow. Do you know, I got to tell you, Ben, about 1 million years ago, literally about, 30, 35 years maybe, could be more. I was brought in by the NHS to do a series of films for them. I was a corporate scriptwriter. And I toured the country into some of the larger NHS, what do you call them, centres, practices. And even back then, they knew they could only give each patient 4 minutes and then throw them out the door. And they worked on the basis, and every single practice told me this. It was terrifying. Remember, I'm going back a long time. That they said, we work on the basis that we say, go away and come back in a week. If they don't come back in a week, they got rid of them. If they come back in a week, they shoot them off to a specialist. So they've still got them off their hands. And I was like, that doesn't fill me with joie de vivre, shall we say. It was extraordinary.
I think we still do it, don't we? Come back and see me tomorrow. Take some aspirin.
Take some aspirin if your leg's dropped off. Give me a call.
Yeah, we'll sort it out tomorrow.
Now,
so welcome to the show, Doctor.
I think I've got the measure of it now.
Yeah.
Yes, a very warm welcome to you.
No, thank you.
He started it.
Welcome. Genuinely.
He started it. Right. Dr. Cave, tell us all about yourself and why you're here. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and coming in from York, Elizabeth Green, hi from New York City, because it's watched all over the world.
I'm Ben Cave. I'm a consultant forensic and general psychiatrist. I sit on mental health review tribunals, so 1 day a week I determine whether people should be detained under their mental health sections or not. And recently I wrote a book, and it's been published by Seven Dials, part of Orion, and it's called What We Fear Most. And it's about reflections of my life in forensic psychiatry. So it's a little bit about me, it's a little bit about the patients and how we've bounced off each other over the years. And it's sometimes funny, it's sometimes pretty gruesome. I think it's easy to read, but it's a hard read at the same time because it deals with some really quite difficult subjects. And I suppose the big point I want to make is that we're talking so much about mental health, and I think mental illness, the thing I deal with, has been lost from the debate and the discussion. And I absolutely applaud the discussion about mental health. It's great. And I think it's destigmatizing the process. What you guys are up to, it's marvelous. You know, having whole things dedicated to men's issues, women's issues on the other channel. Absolutely applaud it.
Just to mark your card, 50% of our audience are women on men's radio.
Great.
Which is delightful.
Well, I listen to Women's Hour on Radio 4 as well, so it's all good. So I just want to redress the balance a little bit and talk about mental illness, because I hope most of us will never have to come and see me, but when you do, it's probably good to know what it's about.
That is very,
this is absolutely fascinating. My only observation, and this is only as a layperson, Doctor, is that, in my opinion, and please feel free to correct me, that an awful lot of focus, almost since the days of Freud, has been trying to fix what's wrong rather than model and teach what works. And it's a bit old-fashioned. I'm reaching for. Correct me. Tell me why I'm wrong, but I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, no, first of all, do call me Ben, please. Everyone does. So
okay, Ben.
Don't stand on ceremony. I suppose by definition, when you come and see a doctor like me, you've spoken to your mates about the issues and it's not worked. You've spoken to the guy in the pub and his solution's not worked.
Yeah.
You phoned the radio host and gone, I've got this problem, and they've not been able to sort you out. So you've been through a whole range of sort of triage processes.
Yes.
And then you go and see your GP, you get your 5 or 7 minutes or whatever it is these days. They refer you to a psychiatrist, and then the psychiatrist may refer you to someone like me for a secondary opinion. So I suppose by that point, something's gone very wrong indeed, because nobody else has been able to sort it out. And I'm a sort of like a neurologist of the mind. Most of my work is about giving medication, often very potent, sometimes dangerous medication, and trying to get people back to a point where they are well enough to start to face life again and have the psychological treatments and the counseling that they probably need at that point. But when I first start to see people, they've often lost touch with reality. They don't know what's going on. They're profoundly depressed, manic, schizophrenic, or delusional. Right. They've often, when I was doing forensic psychiatry, they've committed serious offences as well. So you have yet another social burden. And I'm there to try and sort out the multitude of problems. So I'm not dealing with one issue. I'm dealing with problems dating back from their adolescence, personality issues, dependency issues, mental illness, social isolation, and all that sort of guff. So at that point, yeah, there's a problem. It really is something wrong.
Agreed, yeah.
Let me ask you this, and then I want to dive into the book and everything like that.
Sure.
When we decided to start a station dedicated to mental health, most people said, oh, that's great. And then you've got and I've met him, and he's nothing like he appears in public, Piers Morgan, who is pretty down on the whole thing. And I have a certain sympathy for that, because this is where the waters get muddy, Ben. what you're dealing with is real mental health issues. It's real
Well, I would go further. I'd say mental illness. Yeah.
mental illness. Okay. But it's become the sort of get out of, and even though I'm the co-founder of this station, it's like become the get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, people, the nonsense with those two people jumping the queue or not jumping the queue, I really don't care one way or the other.
Yeah.
But, you know, and everyone said, Russ, how long before they play the mental health card? And I just went 3, 2, 1, go. Boom, ITV immediately. We're worried about their mental. Yeah, of course you blimmin' are. I mean, this is just nonsense. So there is a huge delineation between what you do with mental illness, and people think, oh, yeah, this is affecting my mental health.
And I'm
When it isn't
fascinated
really.
to know, to add on to that, at what level does personal responsibility play into it? At what level are we responsible for our mental health or illness?
Good question.
Well, I think we start out that the law recognizes your personal responsibility. An adult, by definition, starts with capacity to take decisions,
Right.
and they are held responsible for what they do, and that's right and proper. But coming back to the issue of the celebrity who's caught speeding or turned the car over whilst they're high on coke or drugs or alcohol, whatever it is, I've got no sympathy. And if they want to seek help at that point, great. But it's too little, too late. But that's really not what most of the psychiatry teams I work with actually deal with. Take a scenario. Let's assume that I develop tomorrow a delusional belief that my neighbor is trying to pump poison gas into my house. So I go round and I remonstrate because of a genuine belief. And he says, no, bugger off. I'm not doing this, but you're deluded. And I go, no, I'm not, because it's an article of faith by this point. My belief is not amenable to reason. I've lost contact with reality. So let's assume then I hit the neighbor. Okay, I've committed an offense and something should happen, but is the right response to that sending me off to prison? And I would say it's absolutely absurd. What I need is treatment, because I'm an otherwise law-abiding person. I have developed mental illness, which explains my actions. And I agree, sometimes what we do, people have a mental illness and they commit a criminal offense, and it doesn't explain their actions. And I do think the personal responsibility needs to be weighed and set against the issue of the illness. And I suppose that's where my specialty comes in. It's to try and differentiate the two, and sort of to go back to the crude dichotomy of mad or bad, to try and differentiate between the two, and then make some sensible suggestions to the courts.
I've wrestled with that for years. Mad or bad. I've wrestled with that ever since I was old enough to understand, or what I thought I understood, the difference between the two. I mean, it is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, again, from my layman's perspective, I know this is from my own experience that we don't make, and I'm not talking about the level of mental illness that you're describing, but I had a dip a couple of years ago. And we don't make good decisions when we're in stress. And I know the science backs that up, because it shuts down the prefrontal cortex and we respond from our more primitive emotional brain, in my understanding. So that would make sense scientifically. But again, it's levels of responsibility at some other deeper level. Perhaps we are somehow. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Would that sum it up? Maybe, is that fair?
I don't think you can generalize. I think it depends on the nature of the problems. And if you look at somebody's historical narrative, it's many years ago. I saw a guy in his 60s. Turns out he had early onset dementia, and he'd been offending for a few years. And he was going into supermarkets and nicking packets of prawns, for goodness sake. And people sort of kept picking him up and going, what the hell's going on here? And eventually I saw him and I said, so what is the story about the prawns? And he says, I really don't know, doctor. I don't even like prawns. And it's rather sad. So then I do this sort of the cognitive workup. He's actually got a rather an unusual type of early dementia. It's associated with an affective disorder. And I suppose the question is, do you really want to punish someone like that?
Well, no, of course not.
No.
So and set again, when you actually humanize it and talk about the individual, it's very easy to go, well, no, that they're obviously, I don't like the term, psychotic or depressed, or in his case, losing
They're unwell.
contact with his, he had a cognitive impairment. He was unwell.
I hate to do this, Ben, but he is my oldest and best friend, and I was going to do it, and I said, no, I'm a professional.
You're not going to put this up, are you? Oh, no.
Yes, he was just being shellfish. Yeah, he's not been well. He's going over.
I can only
COVID.
apologise, Ben.
He's getting on a plane tomorrow to Los Angeles. Let him have his moment. He's really been so ill.
I can only apologise, Ben.
Lloyd Ski cracked me up. By the way, now, Ben, this came in from New York. Azadon Brown is listening to and watching you from New York State, not New York, but northeastern United States. Michael Verby is watching you from the Costa del Sol, obviously in Spain. And this one in from Elizabeth Green, who's watching you from Manhattan. So and she's put it in a rather pejorative term, but let's just go with the question, if we may. So after the mind-numbing drugs, Elizabeth, you could have kind of polish that a little bit.
No, so say what you think, Elizabeth.
Trust me, I've had coffee with her twice when she visits London. She does. She ain't shy coming forward. So after the mind-numbing drugs, what happens next?
They're not it's the wrong assertion. They're not mind-numbing drugs. They're mind-getting back drugs. By the time I see somebody, they've already lost their minds. And I'm putting them back on the right path. Let's say what I deal with. Let's assume someone's got schizophrenia. I see somebody who comes in. They believe that aliens are invading their mind. They believe MI5 are persecuting them. As the example before, that people are following them in the streets. They're challenging people. You can't let somebody run around like that. It's not fair on them. In a fair and decent society, we have a moral responsibility to help and treat people. The street homeless, most of them are going to have a dependency disorder or an untreated mental illness. Most often, schizophrenia.
When you say dependency, do you mean a drug dependency or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Drug or alcohol. Right.
Yeah, and I would put, I'm really do conceptualize dependency disorders as technically it's not a mental illness, but it's beyond the person's capacity to cope with it by that point.
Oh, it is. I've seen it. I've seen it in friends of mine. Trust me, you're right.
Absolutely. So I think we need to have a medical model, and to call them mind-numbing drugs, I think it's just absurd. When you actually, the treatment...
You've been told, Elizabeth, you have been told by an expert.
Yeah, sorry. It's what I think, very genuinely, though. People need to actually understand why we're giving the drugs. I don't want to rush to drugs. I'd much rather talk to somebody. Some of them are pretty crude, but it reduces the distress people experience. They're hallucinated, they're deluded, they're thought disordered, they can't construct their own narrative in their minds, and they do some pretty bizarre behavior. And that's what I deal with. And God, they need drugs at that point.
Here's an interesting thing. But we'll come back to Elizabeth's point in a second. Obviously, we've had thousands of guests on the show over the years. And one of the things we talk about is homelessness, etc. And I shared that view that everyone on the street... this is horrible, I know, but I'm very honest on this show. I don't pretend. It's not ITV or BBC. It's real. And I always assume that people have ended up on the street because either they're drug addicts or they're alcoholics or both.
Yep.
And it's not true. And a lot of them, and especially we're going to see this as the years, and certainly when we get into 2023, people have just fallen through the cracks, exactly like the American model, where I spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, and you can drive from Rodeo Drive, the most revolting outside of Dubai, ostentatious street in the world, and within 10 minutes you're in Tent City. They're not all drug addicts and alcoholics. They're people. A
lot of ex-military people as well that aren't getting
they're falling through the cracks.
PTSD.
So I don't want to lumber everybody under one umbrella of they're on the street because they're addicted to crack or heroin or they're shooting up or whatever. It's not always the case, is it? I think we have to be slightly mindful of of that.
I like the Portugal. What do you think of this, Ben? The model they've got in Portugal is they decided not to criminalise people that had dependency disorders. So let's say someone was addicted to heroin in Portugal. They would see that as a medical disorder, so people could come forward without the fear of being criminalised. And it's worked. The results have been absolutely phenomenal. And I personally think that's a really good model. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree entirely. I think, first of all, you're right. You were presenting a much more nuanced view, and I'm not saying everyone on the streets homeless is mentally ill or dependent, but a sizable proportion of them are. And I think there are such social pressures at the moment. You're right. We're going to see more people who have lost their houses. We've got the mortgage rate changes recently. It's going to throw people into poverty. Coming to the issue, though, that you've raised about the substance misuse and dependency. Yeah, I'm a big fan of drug courts where people are, it's a specialist drug environment where people understand that people who are dependent to a drug, let's say heroin, you're stealing on a daily basis just to finance your habit. It's going to cost you, for an average addict on the street these days, it's going to cost you, what, 7,500 quid for your drug supply?
Sorry?
That's an awful lot of drugs. When you're when you're seriously dependent on heroin and then you're using a bit of crack rocks as well, it's going to be 100 quid a day. And there aren't many jobs that give you a disposable income like that.
Wow.
There was a researcher called Inciardi in, I think it was Florida, some years back, and he was looking at the amounts that people offend to get the drugs to supply their habit. And it is simply vast. It's every day. I talk about it in my book. There was one guy I saw in a big local prison, and I said, well, when did you realize there was a problem with your substance use? And he was dependent on heroin. And he said he used to do a double shift of shoplifting on a Saturday so he could have a lie-in on a Sunday.
Oh, my God.
And he'd have been a great businessman, but he realized he had a problem when he started to inject it to get the same hit, because previously he was smoking it. And when he used the Sunday's dose on Saturday night because he couldn't wait, he went, I've got a problem, and he came in for treatment.
And it took that to realize that he had a problem.
Well, those are the two key points. But dependency just doesn't start. It's a progressive process. So very few people start by injecting heroin. You tend to smoke it first, and then you start to become tolerant to the effects of it. One of the signs of dependence. We all know about that because
that's a process called downregulation, isn't it? I read.
Well, yes, if you like. You get used to the psychic effects and the physiological effects of the substance you're taking. I remember drinking a pint or 2 pints and feeling very merry, and now I could drink it and barely notice, sadly. So that's my tolerance with alcohol. But it's a common
good place to be in.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper.
Yes, indeed. So
let's have a look at some of these points coming in. This is coming in back from Manhattan. Elizabeth Green saying, that's difficult. I mean that the huge number of us who are depressed, and she's put it in inverted commas. The reason I read it out, Ben, is because we're also going out on deluxe radio, over 70,000 people listening there, but they can't see us, they can only hear us. So it's audio only for them because it's a radio station. Elizabeth Green, Manhattan, as I said, that's different. I mean, the huge number of us who are depressed to take drugs to dumb us down. Oh, why do you say dumb us down?
I feel, Elizabeth, there's a bit of an undercurrent of just keep them quiet, sweep them under the carpet vibe going on with you. Is that what you're thinking? Just to be clear, because I wouldn't entirely agree with that. I think there's some wonderful practitioners, and obviously probably not some wonderful ones as well.
Do you not think many of us? Do you not think many of us Americans have addictive personalities, and it's a question of strength and self-management? Oh God, we could do a 2-hour special just on that question, I think. Well, Dr.
But it's very impossible to but by the time they come to see you, self-management and self-discipline is out the window.
It's gone out the window, isn't it?
Surely. I mean, I had a friend addicted to alcohol, and he was in hospital. He was almost dying. He did die tragically, unfortunately. He turned yellow, and he said, well, I haven't got a drinking problem. And that's the level of denial. And I would imagine it's the same with drugs rather than alcohol, right?
And bringing it down to the correct level of the Daily Show from Beanie, not as easy on the eye as Chantel, who is obsessed with, by the way, who's our every Friday does our film and television reviews, but a truly fascinating and informative guest. There you go. Praise doesn't come any higher than that.
Well, I'm disappointed he doesn't like the look of me as well.
No, I think he does, but he doesn't float in that direction on the river. If you catch my drift. Anyway, so there we are. So this is man. I'm really enjoying this, and you have this sort of mellifluous tone that I could just listen to for absolutely ages. You have that. I would feel comforted and think that I was in safe hands. Where other people who come on as experts, I think I won't get them to check my tire pressures on my car, let alone look after my mental health. They may be very nice, but
I'm with you on that. Can I pick up on the dumbing us down, though? Because
yes, it's a really big point.
I think it is, and it really troubles me that the perception of that lady's therapist or treatment team is trying to dumb her down. I've never had a patient say that to me. You speak to people, find out why they're consulting, and she's writing now, it's personal. I've always avoided medication, just a personal feeling. Great, no, I applaud that. And if you don't want medication, don't take it. It's dead simple. And so long as somebody comes and says, look, I don't want to take medication, doc, but I want to discuss it through, that's fine. The only times I'd want somebody on medication, though, is when it's serious. And I think we need to look at what depression looks like when it's serious. Because depression is just one symptom. Low mood is just one symptom of the syndrome of depression. So you've got concentration problems, sleep disturbance, eating problems, people lose weight, they can't see a future, cognitively they're all screwed up, they don't understand what's going
exactly
on.
my friend who was addicted to alcohol to a T.
They can't process information, they can't see a future, they start to get suicidal thoughts and ideas, they plan what they're going to do, they give away their goods, they try and kill themselves. Now, of all that, low mood, or what sometimes people mistakenly call depression, is just one aspect of it.
It must be frustrating for you as a doctor to hear people, I suppose, and no offense, Elizabeth, I'm not decrying your suffering in any way, because many of us have been through depression, I think me included, but it must be frustrating when people ban these words around without really understanding the finer nuances of it. It's a bit like saying, I went back to check the door again, I'm a bit OCD. Well, that's not OCD, Am I right?
You're absolutely right. And in the old days, we had this sort of dichotomy of psychotic depression, where people had lost contact with reality, and neurotic depression, which is kind of responding to the vicissitudes of life. And God knows we all have a lot of those at the moment.
Yeah.
Psychotic depression is now a severe depressive disorder with psychotic symptoms. And you can have a severe depressive disorder with or without psychosis. Now, the psychosis is the bit where you lose touch with reality. That's where you've lost half your body weight. You're lying in your own feces in bed. You're almost catatonic, you're not getting out, you're not going out, you're not meeting people socially, you're hearing voices saying that you're a shit, and you think you're responsible for the Holocaust when you were born in 1972. So, that's the territory of severe depression with psychosis. Coming back to what most of us fortunately experience, it's the mild and moderate depressions. And I've been through that. I've had my black dog days. I think probably, if I'm being completely open, and I discuss it in the book, I've had a sort of cyclothymic personality. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. But fortunately, I can control it, and I've never resorted to medication. I don't need to. But some people do, and that's the skill of the job. So I'm not here to advocate drugs, especially not drugs to dumb people down. It's an appalling concept, and I'm sorry that people view it like that. But sometimes people need it, and sometimes, and I think the earlier comment is what happens next. It's get people better, and then hopefully they can come off the medication. If we think back,
I've always seen medication as kind of jump leads to start the car and then fine tune the car afterwards. That's my favorite analogy
It's
for
a
it.
it's a terrible analogy when you think about ECT, but I'll let you off.
Oh, thank you. There's me thinking I was being quite clever. Does that work, ECT?
Yes, it does. Yeah, but it started off life in the 1930s. There were a couple of Italian psychiatrists called Saletti and Bini, and they decided to. You've got to remember, back then there was no treatment for severe mental disorders, and that's why we had the asylums, and people would be in hospital for years and years and years of their lives and forgotten about. So kind of somebody had to do something, and they came up with the mistaken notion that if you had a seizure, it treated depression. So then they were looking for a way of inducing a safe seizure. And before, we've tried all sorts in psychiatry, some of it really barbaric, and unfortunately that historical narrative has kind of stuck with us. So they came, instead of it was camphor, I think they injected to induce a chemical seizure. Insulin's been injected for hypoglycemic shock, and then ultimately electricity, which was a sort of newish toy. So it induces a seizure. It became terribly popular, and I suppose it reached a peak in the 60s and 70s. And unfortunately, any invention like ECT, people start to use it too much for conditions where it has no effect. Right. So now it's treated very specifically with very tight legal safeguards, certainly in the UK. I'm not sure about the States. For people with severe depressive illness, which is life-threatening, where people are so dehydrated, treatment-resistant mania, and again, people become dehydrated and physically exhausted to the point they get cardiovascular problems, and catatonia. And that's the type of schizophrenia where your motor cortex is affected by the disease. And basically, you can't move. You're physically stuck in a catatonic state. And ECT is very effective for that. So even today, I've been organizing somebody who's lost half their body weight, is an inpatient, and now he's stopped drinking. And I'm pursuing a course of ECT. Yeah. We've tried the talk therapy, we've tried the drugs, and now we're resorting to kind of what's last in our arsenal.
Wow. These messages are very interesting. I don't want to make it the Elizabeth Green show. I really don't. But I'll put this one up and I'll read it for everyone on Deluxe Radio. I'm messaging, it's long-winded, okay. I have many of the symptoms you just described. Elizabeth, I have to say, when I was listening to that litany, I thought, well, yeah, so do I. But I think a lot of us, view the future sometimes as quite bleak. And I think what I'd really like to discuss with you, Ben, is the difference between, I think too many people, I'm not a doctor, so I've got to be careful what I say. I don't want it to be pejorative, but it's very easy. Let's put it in more neutral terms. It's very easy to think, well, I'm a bit cheesed off today. I'm a bit fed up. I'm depressed. It's not the same thing. Being cheesed off, fed up, and a bit blue, everybody gets that. Depression really is something quite separate from feeling fed up.
And something else you said, which I'd love to pick up on, this really jumped out at me. You said you've had what was the word used? Cyclothermic personality? Was that the word?
Cyclothymic, yeah.
Cyclothymic. I nearly got it. But you said you don't need to resort to drugs, and that this intrigues me. What I would love to know your strategies for mental self-management. I would love to know that if you'd be willing to share any.
I'll try. I think the problem is when you call out a list of symptoms like that, people seize on it, and in a sense, it's a selective abstraction. We listen to the bits we think applies to us, and in that sense, it's a bit like a horoscope, where you go, "Oh yes, that's me, obviously," and I get it. So, I first of all, I think you need to look at the picture in the round and not abstract to your own individual set of symptoms. But when I'm talking to a patient, I will look for an onset of the disorder, and they'll go, yeah, it was a few months ago. Things were okay. My life wasn't great, but then it changed. And there's a qualitative and quantitative change. And I suppose then people get the bleakness and that sense of nihilism, the complete loss of enjoyment that sometimes stops us taking a one-way trip to Dignitas in Switzerland. And when you get that, that's what I mean by the sense of not having a future. It's not, I'm pissed off about the day, I've got a difficult day tomorrow, I want to zap myself forwards to next week because I don't want to put up with the stress of the exams, the separation I'm going through,
I do
the housing
understand
move, whatever.
I
So
understand
it's
the
a
difference.
palpably different feel.
And you mentioned that list of symptoms, and I thought, yep, I was ticking the boxes like yep. Certainly not to the degree.
Not the losing weight or me.
Huh?
I
Apart
said
from
the
that
only
one,
thing I was
shut
thinking,
up.
I'd take some of that, but the losing weight, I thought I couldn't even get that. You know, that really hacked me off.
Well, I find it hard to miss a meal, so I would rather.
Why should you? Why should you? Goodness,
My greatest
life
fear-
is so short.
My greatest
Yeah.
fear, Ben, is that when I had this dip a couple of years ago, is that the light would never come back.
Yeah.
And that I'd be stuck there forever, almost like being behind the gates of Disneyland, where you can see all the wonderful fun and games in there, but you can't get in. And that thought was terrifying.
That's a beautiful description. It's a sad and beautiful description of depression, isn't it?
Yeah.
Horrendous.
So I would say I've experienced that in the mild to moderate range. And even mild to moderate, I don't ever want to go there again, ever. So I've become an absolute passionate advocate for mental health.
Well, do you know that's the other thing? I've often seen people, and I've said, "You've got a moderate depression," and they look indignant and go, "Moderate." And it's a terrible term because, you know, I go, well, actually, moderate's quite severe. It's just that
it's like calling someone moderately attractive, isn't it?
Yeah, you're quite funny. Shut up. It is a horrible thing. There's a thing called the abyss. I looked into it once. Oh, it was the most terrifying moment of my life, and I'm never blooming well going back there. Right, let's deal with some of this. This is coming in from northeastern states. New York State, but as I said, not Manhattan. Azadon Brown, who, Ben, you wouldn't know, is pretty high up in the psychotherapeutic community in the States. John Kennedy's sister, Rosemary, received ECT, leaving her with a more profound diagnostic issue. ECT is currently used in the States and Canada. Given the diagnostic issue, ECT can be very effective. There you go. So that's endorsement.
Which echoes what you said, doesn't it,
basically
Ben?
What you were saying.
I've one more question, which is puzzling me or fascinating me, and then we'd love to hear about your book and for you to give it a shameless, gratuitous plug, because that's what we absolutely encourage that. What's your thoughts on? Because I read a lot. There's a lot of research into cannabis at the moment, particularly CBD. I've also read studies into using psilocybin to treat depression, which is the magic mushrooms ingredient. Of course, I'm not telling you that, obviously, you know that. I'm just saying that for the benefit of the people that don't. Or even microdosing what's known on the street as ecstasy, MDMA. And there has been some promising...
You can add ketamine to that as well, I think.
Ketamine, yeah. Now, obviously, I'm not saying go to your local street dealer. That would be crazy. But under proper medical conditions, and we could go into the history of why it hasn't had much research, and there is a very long back history to it for a zillion reasons. But is it an area that deserves more research, in your opinion? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, I don't want you to think that doctors go, all drugs are bad. We use lots of different drugs all the time.
Yeah.
And what we do is look for the active components in them. Then when we try and purify it, refine it, put it out to medical trials, and then see if it works because it has a therapeutic effect.
Right.
And so that's the starting point. And if the psilocybin, the MDMA, the ketamine or esketamine now, or cannabis have effects, and clearly they have very potent psychoactive effects on the human mind, then it seems not unreasonable to investigate them for effects on depression or whatever it is you're trying to treat. So I've got absolutely no problems with properly conducted trials.
Oh, properly conducted, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But let's not lose sight of the fact that cannabis particularly, and I can go through all of the other drugs as well, but let's talk about cannabis. It's a massively used drug. You know, I'm starting off on the assumption that people are using cannabis when I see them. And if people who have got into trouble for whatever reason or have a psychosis say, no, I'm not using cannabis, I'll want to do a drug test to actually evidence that, because it makes a big difference to the treatment. Now, when you deal with people who have already got schizophrenia, a severe mental disorder, cannabis use at that point increases your risk of relapse probably 8 to 10 times.
Wow.
So it's really bad news.
Even CBD.
Well, no, CBD is different. I'm talking very much about THC, the
THC,
active moiety of cannabis. So tetrahydrocannabinol is the stuff that makes people high. That's why we smoke cannabis. But there's also the CBD in a proportion of the cannabis that people are using or smoking. So I'm pretty relaxed about CBD. It's a proprietary product. I think it's not even classified as a drug at this point, but a lot of my patients say it helps them relax. Good luck to them. No problem. You know, you can go to, you can go to Holland and Barrett and get it. So kind of, so what? If somebody on my ward wants to use it, fine.
I'd rather, instead of going to Holland and Barrett, please go to the Tincture Club, who sponsor the ABC of CBD, which I co-host every Thursday evening at 6 o'clock with the great Oliver Mammon, coming up to edition nearly 100 very, very soon. The difference is, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in just for a sec, Ben, if I can. If you go to Holland and Barrett, it's just a general thing. It's like getting paracetamol, or, you know, it's just a standard thing. It won't be tailored to you. If you go to the Tincture Club and you contact Oliver Mammon, he'll talk to you. He'll give you like a proper conversation, and it will be tailored for you, not just buying it off the shelf. Small
Was he the
plug,
chap I met the other night on the show? The regular presenter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I need to contact him actually. Super show.
Please do.
Tell us about your book, Dr. Ben.
Yes, please.
Oh, I don't know what to say. It's I've been kind of talking about all.
Man.
Well, I'm terrible at these
It's not
things.
Radio 4. Go for it. Go on.
Here it is.
That's what we're talking about.
It's Dr. Ben Cave, What We Fear Most, Reflections on Our Life in Forensic Psychiatry. And it's you can get it on Amazon. There's a wonderful audio book read by a lovely actor called David Rintoul. And he's been in The Crown, and he was actually Captain Jake, Captain Pugwash's evil nemesis. So that's why I chose him, because of
I remember him.
Yeah. So sometimes in the book, when he's meant to be doing a Brummie accent, he does sound a bit Devonian and a bit parroty. But apart from that, it's just brilliant. He inhabits the role beautifully. He's funny, it's poignant, and it deals with some of the more serious cases and what I've learned. And as I said at the start, how I've bounced along with my patients and what we've learned from each other. And it's about my development over the years.
So you were going to give us some tips on, if you can, what you do to stay mentally healthy. And I would also add to that, is there any preventative maintenance we can do? Because the thing I've noticed with people, particularly young people, they're saying my mental health with an implication that they have some agency in it. But when I was their age, it was just like, if you got cancer, it was the luck of the draw, tough luck. Now it seems that people are certainly willing to take more responsibility, to have more agency in it, or recognizing it as a thing they can have a part in. And I find that really.
What do you mean by agency?
Having a choice in the matter, being able to choose to choose for yourself to be mentally healthy, rather than being a victim of it, being a cause, rather than being at effect, if you like.
All right, cool.
And again, if I'm wrong about any of this, please tell me. But I'd love to know your tips with preventative maintenance, because it's so important.
I'm not sure. I think most doctors, you want to do as they say, not as they do. So if you want to know what I say, it's look after yourself. And I was talking to my wife about this very issue, about so many younger people saying I need to look after my mental health. And I think it's rather lovely, because they're thinking about themselves. They're taking time out to reflect on what's going on for them. And I think they're talking about what I would have said was stress and anxiety 30 or 40 years ago. And having been a junior doctor first and then gone into psychiatry, as you have to, you're a doctor if you're a psychiatrist. I remember the terrible stress of the hours and how it was just soul destroying. And you would be working days and nights, quite literally, and days and nights. And I used to smoke. I was a heavy smoker, and I stopped when my first daughter was just probably about 2 years old. And the way I did it, My wife then bought me a very tight-fitting Lycra cycle top, and I looked terrible in it. And 4 months later, I did my first Olympic distance triathlon, and then
Good God.
And then I did long distance triathlon. I've always enjoyed sailing. I love open water swimming. And I've my little place where I go back to recover myself, which I guess is looking after my mental health. But for me, it's just a pleasant little sanctuary, as a little apartment in the Alps in France. And I go there when I'm stressed out and have difficult times, and I'll spend a weekend there. I'm restored and refreshed. Now, not everyone can do that. So we need to find our own little safe space. I think we need to take time to reflect with loved ones, form a social group, try not to drink, use drugs. And if you do, do it in moderation when you want to, not need to.
My little safe space is called the Soho Whiskey Club on Old Compton Street, or I might have a panini at Bar Italia with Anthony and everybody.
You're looking at my little safe space. The amount of deep discussions we've had in this room, peer support and feeling understood is very, very important, I think.
Absolutely.
I would, but I find that
I'm
my mini
really-
Schnauzer it's a bit of a one-way conversation. I find that her basic grasp of psychology, I'm going to be honest, is a little bit low.
That's disappointing.
I mean, she comes from the home of Freud. I mean, mini Schnauzers are Austrian in their origin. You would have thought she'd have some basic understandings, but
I would say if she can wrap you around her little finger, her understanding of
just
psychology is pretty high.
just slightly.
But actually, psychoanalysts don't say much. Maybe actually she's really taken Freudian therapy to heart.
Well, she's got the little Freud beard, of course.
Yeah, she just looks at
Kind of
you.
nods, and you're
Yeah, well, that's therapy.
Although it annoys me when she says, "And how do you feel about that?" Then it really annoys me when she says, "Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week. But if you see my receptionist on the way out, we'll book you in for next week." And I go, "But Ebony, we're making a breakthrough."
Is there reason for hope, Ben? Is there, this whole conversation about mental health, is it leading to something, to a breakthrough, to a shift into a new paradigm or something like that?
Yes, I think so. I think that we are in psychiatry just discovering the circulation of the blood, and what William Harvey did all those years ago, we're starting to do with neuroimaging and genetics and understanding what mental illness really is. And when you can actually see people hallucinate now when they're in a scanner, and I've done it myself in research studies looking at frontal lobe function, that's truly remarkable. And we're making such strides well beyond anything of my understanding. But the top cutting edge science will actually push back mental illness, and we'll stop. I hope to God that we'll look back in 50 years at what I'm doing and say, this was like putting leeches on people.
Or drilling holes in their heads.
I'm going to make you blush, Dr. Ben Cave.
Yeah, you've had
Stand by
some
to go
lovely
red.
comments, yeah.
This is from Ramsey, who is a real mover and shaker, may I tell you. Somebody sent me his CV. I nearly fainted. And a regular viewer. Dr. Ben's book has had fab feedback on Amazon. Just downloaded a sample for my Kindle. If it's as clear, interesting, and accessible as Dr. Ben articulates, it should be a fab read.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you very much. And do put another review on.
And well done. Man after my own heart.
Can I just point out,
something.
I got my first 3-star review 2 days ago, and I was mortified. It was 90% positive.
It's awful.
And I was traumatized.
I've been there, and you think, what did I do wrong?
You've raised an interesting point.
You've
raised an interesting point. I hope you said that with tongue firmly in cheek. But social media and mental health.
Oh,
yeah,
shocking,
yeah.
shocking. By the way, Dr. Ben, don't be too dismissive. Ramsey is really very sparing with his praise. In all seriousness, he's
I'm not
a
dismissive
great.
at all.
He is a great critic. If he doesn't like something, boom.
I'll take praise. That's the other thing.
I'll take it. Take it.
Yeah.
Take it. It's such an interest. Now, you were just saying something. I don't know. Are you all right for time? By the way,
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay. You were saying something. You said that you could see, presumably on the screens that you're watching out, somebody hallucinating. Did you say? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
So what are you seeing? You're seeing movements on how does that work?
Oh, if you put somebody in a functional MRI scanner, or what I
Yeah.
was using was something called a SPET scanner,
Okay.
and then you give them activation tests so that they have to think about things, you can see when they say they are hallucinating, when they're hearing voices that are not there, you can see the auditory cortex starting to metabolize sugar. So it changes color, and you can see the physical stigmata of hallucinatory experiences. So when people say they're hearing voices, they really are. And you can see it objectively in real
And
time.
how is it treated? Is it treated with drugs or counselling or what?
If you're hearing voices, then, well, loads of people hear voices for lots of reasons, but that's the skill of the diagnosis. That's the interview. It takes me an hour to go through things. And then I could say, well, look, these are genuine hallucinations. We've done all the tests. It would appear to be perhaps a schizophrenic illness. And I'm not saying hearing voices equals schizophrenia, but most people with schizophrenia do have auditory hallucinations. So looking at it the other way around. And then, yeah, I would give them medication to try and dampen down the voices. And in most cases, it helps, it works, it reduces the psychotic experience. And don't get me wrong, these are not trivial voices. These are pejorative, angry, hostile voices. They're commanding, they control the person sometimes. The person feels as if they are under some external control. It's a passivity experience, like they're a marionette. And that's shocking. I can't think of anything worse than to be psychically controlled by somebody else. Think about going through an
Wow.
average day like that. That needs treatment. That's an illness.
Wow. Can I ask you what might seem on the surface of
I
it a
agree.
really dumb question? I live in London. I'm in and out of town and Soho all the time. And you see people wandering around, well, everywhere, and they're talking to themselves, and sometimes it gets quite aggressive. If they come, this you might think it's a terrible question, but if they come up to you, one can be a little bit nervous because you don't know what sort of state. Is there anything that one should do or should not do so you don't exacerbate the situation?
Good question.
This is an unwarranted approach from somebody who is discernibly unwell, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're walking down the street, you're minding your own business, and suddenly somebody lurches out of a doorway and starts yelling in your face, sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, look, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be intoxicated with alcohol, or they're going to be having a bad day, and you walk away. Walking away is the best form of self-defense. I would never get into a confrontation with anybody. There's no disgrace in running away if you need to. For some people, I've actually called up the local police, though, because when somebody is noticeably mentally unwell on the street, they need help. And actually, the police have powers under Section 136 of the Act to take somebody who appears to be ill to a place of safety. And that could be the police station, but more likely it's a local hospital. And
What changes would you like to see? Because I agree with you, people like that, I wouldn't like to see them thrown into prison any more than I'd like to see them locked up in an asylum for years like we used to do. But
yeah,
it seems to be prison is the kind of best of a bad lot. What changes would you like to see in a more enlightened kind of society when it comes to mental health issues?
You touched on the prison. First of all, I'd like to sort out the crisis of staffing that we have affecting nurses at the moment. There's an appalling lack of mental health nurses. So many CAM services, child and adolescent mental health services, have been closed down. In a sense, by the time we get to see people with severe mental illness at the age of 30 or 40, the damage has been done. And what we need to be doing, I think, it's like stopping people smoking to begin with, or treating the end stage cancer later on. And actually, I'd like to see so much more work done at the early stages. Head Start programs, educational work, truancy, talking frankly to people about substance misuse at schools, sex education, all of that stuff.
I agree. I mean, because we treat the symptom, we don't really treat the cause. And by that time, the cause is so embedded. So, if it could be nipped in the bud.
Yes. I mean, when I see people leaving prison after 5 years and they're still functionally illiterate, it's appalling. I went to Germany to look at their, it's like a cross between Broadmoor or a medium secure psychiatry service. And I was taken into what we would call an occupational therapy workshop in Germany, in Heine. It was an ergotherapy. And they were learning arc welding. They had a Mercedes Jeep that they stripped and moved it into the next room where they reassembled it. They were learning real skills. And when people came out, they could get a job. That they could actually.
We need a Patch Adams of the mental health industry, don't we?
For sure. For
Can
sure.
I ask you one more question? A very good friend of mine has OCD, and I had OCD, and I know it can be really, really disabling. I know the traditional treatments, there's the SSRIs, there's the exposure with response prevention. Anything better on the horizon that I could tell her, because I'm going to see her next week. So I've got to ask this question. How can we beat OCD?
I think it's, as you've said, there are lots of books and self-help manuals out there, but I think you're right that the mainstay of treatment is CBT and SSRIs, usually at pretty high dose. I've had OCD myself. I grew up with it from the time I was a kid, probably seriously to about the age of 20. I was a compulsive checker, very full of rituals, and thankfully it's dissipated and reduced in my adult life, and thank God for that. But it was profound and awful. And when you see people whose lives are completely stymied by the repetitive nature of the rituals they have to go through, it destroys their life. And I've had people in their bedrooms unable to come out, the Howard Hughes syndrome sort of thing. But no, it's a very severe illness. And, again, people talk about a bit of OCD, but it's profound and damaging. And the treatment, I can't really talk about what's on the horizon. I simply don't know. But I wish your friend well. And always remember that the treatment approach is not therapy or medication. It's both. And I would take treatment wherever you can get it. I'm really tired of the concept of people either pursuing a path of counseling or CBT or medication. For goodness sake, do both.
I had the most fantastic treatment for it. It was a guy. Can I shout him out? Can I give his name? Dr. Peter Kolb. There's been documentaries about him, and he's based at the St. George's Trust in Tooting, or at least he was. And his demeanour was very compassionate, but he was as logical as like your Data or Spock in Star Trek, depending on which iteration of the show you watch. If OCD is anything, it's a disorder of the imagination, and he was so down the line logical, and that's exactly what I needed at the time. I did not need anything fancy. It was pure dyed in the wool logic, and eventually his logic won out because I trusted him, because I say he had a very good manner as well.
It's a very sophisticated defense mechanism, though. I think whenever I see people with OCD, I always think, what is it hiding? What's underneath it? Is it the crippling anxiety, stress, depression?
Do you know, I agree, because we see that with eating disorders, don't we? It's the only thing that person feels they can control.
Yeah.
But all the personal development material I've read seems to be much more about managing and mastering the self, not managing and mastering the world. Yes. And until we get that, then I guess this is going to continue. But it's that whole inner journey, hero's journey, if you like, and all that sort of thing. Perhaps as we evolve as human beings, our understandings will evolve with us. I hope
this is going to go down as one of my favorite shows.
Dr. Ben, this has been fascinating.
Yeah, you have been just terrific, and I rarely say this in regulars of the show, that I could listen to you for absolutely ages. That's why I was much quieter than usual, because I found everything you were saying, going, oh, that's really deep. Well, that's really clever.
Let's see the book again.
It's What We Fear Most. Let's see the book. It's available on Amazon. Yeah, What We Fear Most. And Ramsey thinks it's going to be really good, and if he thinks it's good, that's good enough for me. Dr. Ben Cave, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ben.
Really appreciate it. Brilliant stuff.
Pleasure. Lovely to see you both, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, it's been an absolute joy, Dr. Ben. Thank you so much.
It's been our honor, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah,
Take
very
care.
much so.
Have a lovely day. Bye-bye. What a charming wowzer ballad and cowser. What a fabulous guy. What a terrific guy. Let's as we wrap up, let's just go across to New York State. Azadon Brown says, we must rethink our approach to mental illness and the homeless. At least in Canada and the States, homelessness is often treated as a crime or a nuisance rather than a mental health issue. And, as I always say, and I'm never proud of it, When America sneezes, Britain catches a cold. The tent cities in America are diabolical because there's no safety net. You haven't got social care over there. You're either okay or you're finished. It's horrendous.
Like that
We
here.
don't
You
want
froze.
that. We don't want that here. We just don't.
No,
We don't want thousands of people just kicked to the curb, because I think life is
through
tough,
no
and I think
fault
it's
of their
going to
own,
get tougher.
an awful lot of the time. So what's the solution? Education, new thoughts on things, empowerment, I suppose. Self-mastery thrown in.
And not wasting funds on complete rubbish, and wasting and putting funds where it needs to be. It's a simple, sweeping thing. Thank you so much, Neil, or should I say Magnum PI. Thank you for everything, as always. I'll be back on Friday with Phil Dave. I've asked him if he wanted to take the day off because of losing his dog, but no, what a trooper guy is.
What a trooper.
Anyway,
I'll see you Monday, folks.
Look forward to it. Take care. See you Friday. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon.